That it does, though, is it living validates the pain. It makes it not for nothing. When I think of your story and all of the knowledge that you've gained, I just did a grief group last night and I referred to some of the things that I learned from you. And I think you should know that last night at my center, I had like a room of, 15 people because more people came than I thought were going to come. And you positively impacted every life in that room, and I believe served as a protective factor for them. And that is a gift from your children, from your loss, and that honors them.
Let's talk about suicide. It's a word that a lot of people are scared of, but you have made it your life mission to feel comfortable in this space. And that I have struggled in this area, especially after losing my children. And so this is going to be a really good episode. I might cry, you might cry, but let's just introduce yourself professionally. Let's start there.
Sure. My name is Cass Walton. I serve as the executive director for Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention Partnership and as the co-chair for the Suicide Prevention Collaborative of El Paso County. And so what that means is that I spend a lot of time thinking about and strategizing about how to prevent suicide. Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention is a nonprofit that provides free services all in the name of suicide prevention.
So let's talk about those statistics. I'm sure you know some off the top of your head.
Yeah. Right now in our community, we're losing, on average, about 3 to 4 people per week to death by suicide. And I will say in my work on the loss team, so we have a team that responds to suicide deaths as closely to the time as they occur. I don't think that a week goes by where we're not sitting with a newly impacted individual or family, and it's just incredibly sad.
And what about national statistics? We have a lot of national viewers.
Statistically across our nation, it's still among the first and second leading cause of death for all of our ages, from adults to our children. When you think of how we're losing kids, 10 to 18, and knowing that suicide is right up there, it makes you ask why. This is the United States. This is a first world country where we have so many privileges, and folks are choosing to take their own life, and most often by firearm, which the topic and subject of firearms just continues to be controversial across our nation, and it truly is a factor in suicide death.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you, I'm a gun owner, and I, a couple months ago, interviewed another psychiatric nurse practitioner who her daughter completed suicide by her own firearm. And so it doesn't have to be such a bipolar conversation.
Really, it does not.
We're like, oh, you can't take my guns versus, no, there is, it's not all or nothing. Like we have to, I just get goosebumps as I think of her story of believing that she was a safe gun owner. And so...
Especially in cases of youth.
Yeah.
The households, it's usually the household firearm, and the household usually is engaging in some level of safe storage. The issue is that they're thinking of keeping the firearm safe from strangers. So it's forgetting. To me, it's the same thing that we do for like toddler safety, right? People are strapping their bookshelves to the walls,
putting little things in all the plugs.
Yeah, even though they're like, my child is not going to be climbing on bookshelves,
right? But
just in case, I'm going to latch it to the wall. And I think it's the same thing about firearms. I think it's great that right now in this rational space, you're able to say, I don't think anyone in our household will do that. But why not take precautions? We take precautions with outlets, poisons, all kinds of things. And, it shouldn't be so controversial.
Yeah. So do you think this is two separate issues, the suicide in this 10 to 18 and adult suicide?
I think that there are different reasons for the different demographics. I think the 10 to 18-year-olds comes down to, how I phrase it, is a lack of mental health literacy. You know, in cases of youth suicide, we're seeing more often that these are youth who are identified to have mental health challenges. And so the parents are like, well, put them in therapy.
Check.
The box is checked. We're safe. I've sat with so many families now where they're like, you know, he or she has been in therapy for weeks. Also, there's an issue of when a young person is, you know, screening low risk on a suicide screening, you know, everybody's taking a sigh of relief. But what we have to remember is suicide risk is dynamic. And so if there are risk factors present, even though they're scoring low in this moment, you don't know what will change their situation. And because of those ever-present risk factors that might be there for that person, that means their window of tolerance is smaller than the average person who has not been at risk of suicide. And so a situational crisis could occur. I could get an argument with my mom, with my partner, with my friend. I could receive bad news at work. And then that is going to push me to that dangerous place much quicker than what people are thinking. And so oftentimes the safety plans that are in place either get too relaxed or they just get abandoned because there's an assumption that the risk is gone.
Yeah. Well, there's two things that I want to talk about parallel to that is one as a parent and even for kids and this mental health literacy that you talk about. I think one of the conversations around that is that we're separating mental illness from mental health, and we're saying I'm going to take them to the therapist, I'm going to take them to the psychiatrist, and putting the responsibility outside to a professional. And you know, I talked about this, like we're all on this mental health journey. We need to work on ourselves, show our children that we're working on ourselves, and you know, be talking about like we don't just talk about it when there's mental illness. We should be talking about mental health and the things that, and taking some personal responsibility for that. Because parallel to that, as the professional that people are bringing their children to, I feel sometimes like my hands are tied. Like I'm, you know, I know there's a risk, you know, and our system is broken. Like we can put them in the hospital for 3 days, but as soon as they say they're not suicidal, but we know that most suicides are impulsive. So the 3-day just kind of gives us a safety net to then hopefully put in the services that they need. But that kind of personal responsibility, and then as a provider, you know, feeling that our hands are tied sometimes.
Yeah, I think even saying the word services. So first off, illness and health are so intertwined, right? Illness is part of our health. And so they cannot be two separate issues. When we think of how we're managing our health on a regular basis, like you can't, if I only focused on being healthy when I went to my doctor's office, once a year for my annual physical, I would not be maintaining my health. You know, I'm very aware that to maintain my health, there are things that I have to do in my lifestyle, at home, across all of my environments to maintain my health. And I don't know why folks want to like separate their brain from that, even though your brain is like, it's in there. It's part of this body that we use every single day. And so that is a concept that I think is hard. Just in general, our culture isn't great about preventative measures for anything, you know, that has to do with health. But then you add mental health into that and people get weird. It's like, why? Why? It's your brain. Like that would be like choosing to get weird about your foot health, you know, or any other single part of our body. And so then this idea, I think what segments that is, or what supports that idea is when we say, let's get services in place. And so I think, yes, just like if I have any other health issue, I want to be seeing a specialist, you know, and to supplement that specialist, there might be other professionals that might be able to support my wellness. However, the strongest protective factors are your people and connection. So if your loved one is in therapy, but they have no friends, if your loved one is in therapy, but they've lost their job, or, they don't go to school anymore because they hate it there. So if they have no way to add value to the world, these are the things that services cannot do.
Right.
Which folks are not thinking about.
Yeah.
So you can have a really great provider, mental health provider, but if you don't have those supplemental things, those protective factors, if you're not focused on building those and growing those, the risk level really doesn't change.
Yeah, and I think about that often just for myself. Like, I have a really good support system, and it's
So
not
important.
people I pay. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's my family, my friends, and even, someone that I haven't talked to in several years, might call me up, and being able to open and connect with people. I can't remember the name of the book, but there's a whole book on this connection, and that lack of connection is the universal problem in the mental health space.
It really is. At our center, we see a lot of individuals who are chronically suicidal, right? And so last year we started implementing this. When we do a service assessment, we do a quality of life inventory to see what protective factors do we need to help you build up. And almost always there is a lack of supportive connections and a skill deficit in how do I address that?
Right.
It's an overwhelming thought. I mean,
when you feel like you're weird, you're an outcast.
Yes.
How do you actually
Absolutely.
connect?
And then when you're a grown-up, where do we meet people? We go to work. We go to the grocery store. People only meet people in the grocery store in rom-coms. I have never made a friend in a grocery store. So it's like, we don't know how to make friends. And unfortunately, that skill deficit has gotten even wider with our, steps forward in technology. So now, because also as we get older, we don't have time to be on Discord and all these different things that young people do.
Oh my gosh, it changes so much.
All these different things where they connect, and then you get older and you have to work and you have to do all these things. And then you go to those old, and nobody on here are people that I connect with, because now you're aging out of that. So then I've never learned, once I leave this, how to make new connections. And that's tough. Because the older we get, the harder it is to push ourselves to go out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew. So lots of heavy stuff here. I'm trying to think of, because there's several ways that we can go with this. Let's focus on kids first.
Sure.
10 to 18. And what people can do before anyone ever talks about suicide. How should you be talking to your child, not when they're depressed and telling you they're suicidal? Because one of the fears that I have with the anti-stigma movement is that I feel like the kids are getting younger and younger that are talking and completing suicide. Is that because when I was 9, I didn't know what suicide was? So how should we be supporting that without feeding into this is an option for somebody?
The way that I think we first start preventing suicide is from the moment a little human comes into this world, helping support their self-regulation. So when a baby cries, letting them know how they get their needs met. And, making those initial very important connections, so that from the moment that they start practicing being a human, they're engaging in connection and self-advocacy, which, with a baby is like crying and making noises and pointing at things. And then thinking through, how do we support the skills that are required to create a life you want to live? And I know there's so many thoughts and opinions about this concept of gentle parenting, and all these different things. But you think through the things that we have done to make young people believe they have to have it all figured out. And it starts with things like, don't cry. What a big boy, you are. Look at you doing it all by yourself. And you think of, why is that so ingrained in us? That we need to know how to do things on our own, that we should be solving our own problems. And those are the things that we should be proud of. When really it's like affirming, I love that you're asking for help right now. That's really smart of you.
Yeah.
Or when someone is showing emotion instead of saying like, button it up, or like, I'll give you a reason to cry, but tell me why you're crying. Help me understand. And then eventually they'll move away from crying because they'll be learning during this process how to use their words. And, showing them what we're proud of. I'm so proud of you for being able to talk about your emotions. Look at you playing with your friends so nicely, and just affirming and being proud of those things. Because right now, if you ask the average kid, why does your parent love you? They think it's because I'm good at sports. I get good grades. I play the violin. I'm in chess club. I'm on National Junior Honor Society, and then if you ask a parent, like, why do you love your kid? Those are not the things that they're listing off.
Right.
But you think of what we affirm.
Right.
What do we talk about in public? What do we post on our social media that we're proud of?
Yeah.
And so that's really how you prevent suicide.
Yeah.
And really help them. We made a mistake when we started deciding to manage our children's schedule at such a high level. I remember my first rejections because it would be like, do you want to come out and play with me? And they'd be like, I'm watching cartoons. I'll come out later. Like, cool. Do you want to come out and play with me?
And this is in your neighborhood
Yes.
when you were a kid? Okay.
And so those are, you think of like how I learned about rejection. And those are really low level rejections, and then, but it starts to give you this concept that you're not everybody's first choice all the time. And that's not the end of the world. We started making play dates for kids. They stopped being involved in that social initiation.
Yeah.
And then we started scheduling all of their time. And so then they get into the world, they get to about middle school, right? And we're like, okay, you're on your own. And they want to be on their own.
Right.
Right? But they are not.
They had no practice.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not equipped. They're not equipped. And also, it's the least likely time in your time of growing up that you want to access your adult, because adults become very uncool when you're in middle school. And so it's just thinking through, how do we help our children develop skills so that they can continue to create a life that they will want to live?
That they want to live. I love that. And so we're just going to move up here of like, what advice would you give to the parent who this is like their child made a statement, whether it's a passive suicidal statement or they outright said, I want to kill myself, but they know that there's now some concern. And I know, they'll seek professional assistance and stuff, but to that parent, how can they self-regulate? Because now they're scared, right? Like,
absolutely.
And you want to like, put them on restriction or something, like.
You're not just scared.
Yeah.
You're taking it personal. You're immediately like, what have I done wrong as a parent? How did I create a situation where my child is talking about taking their own life and your feelings are hurt? So you take any person whose feelings are hurt and they're terrified, and you have to realize you're not a rational person right now.
Right.
So we always talk about the strategy of check and choose. So first, like, check on yourself. How are you feeling? What's your level of emotional reaction to this? And take some time to ground yourself and get regulated yourself before you go any further.
Yeah.
Because if you don't go in there in a thoughtful, intentional way, you're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that, check your environment. Like, are we about to have this conversation in a place that makes sense? Is it safe? Is it sound? Does it support honest and safe communication? And then check on what you think the needs of your child are. Like, what would be driving this? And if your answer is, I have no idea, then remember that they are an expert in themselves.
And we often don't give them that respect.
We do not. And then we say choose. And then choose what you're going to do. Once you go through this process, letting your rational brain return, then choose. Make a choice of how you want to proceed. And usually that should just start with some listening. You know, we often, when a kid says something like, I don't want to be here anymore, or I just want to die, or I give up, you know, we have these knee-jerk Hallmark card responses of like, this too shall pass. It isn't, I know it feels like a big deal right now, but in the big picture of things, this is not a big deal. Or, you know, I was your age once too, and I know it feels hard right now, but it's not. All of those really thoughtful but invalidating statements. And really, you know, the next thing you should do is focus on meeting the needs of your kid. And it's hard because your needs are right on your chest. I want to know you're safe. I want to feel in control, because feeling out of control feels unsafe.
Yeah. And then there's some parents, and depending on the situation, that they feel like that statement is a manipulation. And I'm not talking about in someone who's been diagnosed with major depression and we know is suicidal. I'm talking about that progression stage. And I love the way you said, like, check yourself. It doesn't matter. It's still, now this is out of the box, and now we have to address it, right? Like that response of, this is manipulation, I'm just going to put you in trouble for this, is what, like you said, that inability to self-regulate yourself.
Exactly. It's an emotional response, and it's a defensive kind of anger response, because if you think of the needs that anger meets, it just makes you feel a little bit in control. Right? So when you're feeling really vulnerable and uncomfortable, anger is a really comfortable place to go. And so, you know, what I recommend and what I try and engage in myself after doing a lot of checking in is get curious and make sure that you're compassionate with it. You'll hear our team at Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention, they're always like, we know compassion and curiosity. But it's just true, you know, and have your young person tell you their story. Like, tell me more. Tell me how you got to this place where you're feeling this way. Tell me how you got to a place where you would rather not be here. You know, and then listen with open ears, because the other thing is we feel very defensive. You know, and oftentimes it's like, our kid, you don't realize how weighted your words are with your kid. You know, just a look of judgment is enough to shut them down. So it's really opening yourself up to hearing their story, hearing their perspective, remembering, this is a perspective of a kid. And that's why you really need to hear, because that means they feel really passionate about it. You know, so being able to hear their story, understand what's driving those thoughts of suicide, which are usually, I am backed into a corner. I feel trapped. I just want to feel different. And I feel like I'm all alone in figuring it out. So if you can sit there and connect with them and listen to their story in a way that says, I want to hear you. Your words are important to me. You are valuable to me. And I believe you have something important to say. That just changes the dynamic in your relationship enough that you should be able to partner with your kid to figure out how to help them move forward in a way that does not include dying.
Right. Does not include dying. It's super important, and I'll probably mention this again, but I talk about making the decision now to never complete suicide while you're okay. You know, what age is appropriate to have that conversation? Because remember I talked about, like, sometimes you can start instilling ideas that weren't there. But I know that has saved me and saved many people, like, because suicide could just be a feeling. I feel suicidal. It doesn't have to be an action.
It does not.
And so what do you think would be a good age to have that conversation while they're well, while kids are well?
I think, you know, as soon as they're starting to learn about life and death. So, you know, and
I love that.
You think about when that first happens, it usually happens like around first grade. you know, and whatever situation brings it up. But, you know, in most cases, that's when you're usually having conversations about that. And part of it is just, there are so many other options.
Right.
There are so many other options, and you're such a capable human, and you have all of these things to try. And I would argue that you could almost not run out of new things to try if you're just willing to live. And so we talk a lot about thinking like someone who's going to live. Because when you start relying on suicide as a coping strategy, as a deal with yourself, like I could always do it tomorrow, I don't have to be here, you know, then you're coming from a place of someone who's dying. And, you know, there are some cultures where when someone's terminally ill, they don't even tell them, because as soon as you tell someone they're dying, they start to act like they're dying and live like they're dying and think like they're dying. So it's like, think like a person who is going to live. What does life look like? And it just changes the mindset.
Yeah, that's great. So let's move into the children who are in treatment. They have a diagnosis. They are, there's significant suicidal concerns. And parents and the kid themselves should be doing some of their own research, are probably getting different messages.
Yeah.
And like, how do I actually get better? And, you know, I think what you said was brilliant. It's like, you just don't give up. Like, you're right. The doctor said that this was going to work and this didn't work, right? Okay, but there's always another choice. There's always something else that we could be doing. What would you say to those teenagers, parents, hopefully going through this together?
I think it's really difficult because, especially if you are dealing with, you know, depression or anxiety that just feels like it won't go away, and I've tried everything, and, you know, then you start to feel like, does this work for other people? Then something is super wrong with me.
Right.
And, you know, you start to be hesitant to tell people, like, this is also not working. And so a lot of these kids will start faking. And they're afraid to disappoint that really hardworking parent that's been helping them access all those different things that, like, nope, this isn't the thing either. And so I think first, it's not using the language of, you're going to get better. Right? It's like, we're going to manage this. Because there are many health afflictions that we have where it's like, I know that that's never going to go away. What we want to do is create a situation where every single day you're experiencing a time of contentment. You know, and I think that especially when you're focused on how unhappy you are or how discontent you are, then you start to have this unrealistic belief of how other people are living.
Yeah.
You start to believe like, oh, she feels great every day because she doesn't feel like me. She doesn't have my diagnosis, you know, and so...
They unfortunately, some people own it.
Yes.
And then it becomes like who they are rather than what they're dealing with.
Exactly. And so one thing that I like to do is throughout the day, if any moment of contentment occurs, make note of it. And as a parent, you might not, you know, it's not like make note of it, and, you know, but I want to be able to refer back to it because a lot of times, you know, it's like, how are you doing? Terrible. How are things going? Not good. You know, and I want to be able to push back on that a little bit and say, I noticed yesterday you really enjoyed this thing. You know, and even in that moment when they are having some contentment, it's like, this seems like an okay time for you right now.
Yeah.
It seems like right now things are okay. And having them acknowledge and sit in that.
I love that you use the word contentment rather than gratitude. I feel like everybody says, you know, make a gratitude list. And I think those are important. I do it for myself. But sometimes the weight is so heavy. Gratitude is an act. Like I have to do something. Well, and so I love that you said contentment.
Yeah, because what kind of life am I living if I have to be thankful that yesterday I enjoyed my shower? Like to me, that's like weighing the scales a little bit. And so you don't want to take value or add value to things. If someone's feeling grateful for something, awesome. Let's validate it. Let's talk about it. But also, let's just create some realistic expectation for what life is supposed to be like. Every day is not rainbows and sunshine. I don't feel 100% happy every day. Like, what is an average level of contentment for the average person? And, how do I start to fill up my jar of contentment a little bit by acknowledging, like, I didn't mind having breakfast with you yesterday.
Yeah.
That was something that was kind of enjoyable, and then realizing, like, so that means that yesterday was not all bad. Okay, fine. And it's just starting to find those little bits and realizing, like, it's not all bad. It's never all bad. And if it is all bad, there are definitely things that can be done to address that. But I would bet if we're looking at it through a realistic lens, it's not all bad.
Right. I love that. Perfect way and practical ways to refrain. I always talk about, like, the self-development world is it's almost magical thinking, And when you're trying to be on this journey and you're listening to someone that says, well, if you just think positive things will happen. And, I'm a consumer of a lot of that, and I think it helps me in some ways, but also it didn't save my children, and it didn't take away the pain of losing children, and it's just unrealistic. So having that ability to be practical and find, contentment. I love that word.
I've watched my own daughter just struggle with just chronic mental health challenges from a very young age, and watching her face as people tell her to, like, engage in positive thinking or to own her own happiness. Like, they're very lucky she doesn't have something sharp in her head. So I'm just like, also, you don't want to, you're not sitting in that person's shoes. You don't know how heavy that weight is. And to act like you do, and then to act like, if you've ever gone to the gym with a friend who's, like, significantly fitter than you, and, you're, like, trying to keep up, and you're trying to, like, stand next to them and do reps with them, and you're like, and they're just, like, talking full sentences, and you can't even breathe.
And they're like, don't you love this? And you're like, no, I don't.
I'm never working out with you again. And also, I suck at this. It just, instead of making you feel hopeful or making you feel like, oh, I'm going to strive for that, it's just because of the way human minds work, it highlights for us all of our negatives.
Right.
And so it's just really, when people say things that I think just need to be more than, like, a sticker on a water bottle, but, like, meet people where they're at. Well, what does that even look like? And so that really means that your conversation needs to start with some curiosity about,
you have to know who
where
you're talking
are
to.
you at?
Yeah.
Help me understand so I know where to meet you.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your why, if you feel comfortable talking about your daughter, or just, like, your journey in this.
I grew up in a traditional Asian household, so we did not talk about anything, really. You could watch the most uncomfortable interaction happen between two adults because they're upset with each other, and then 2 seconds later, it's swept under the rug. Everyone's being polite. We're just moving forward with it. And then 3 days later, you hear a big blow up, and they're referring back to lists of things that had just been kept getting swept under the rug. And I didn't even know what mental health was. Like, we never talked about things like that, but it was really clear to me there were people around me that were not okay. And so the way that I responded to that, just being human, is you make accommodations, you change the way that you are. And so I went into adulthood as this high anxiety, very empathic, because always trying to figure out what do we need to do to navigate this day?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a miserable way of living. And so then, of course, like many other people who enter the field of mental health, it was really like to figure out, what is this? What is this? Mm-hmm. And then realizing that there are so many people living that way. And once I was empowered with the skills to talk about things out loud, it was life-changing for me. And then to know that a lot of our mental health factors are passed on genetically, you know, and so it's just those things where you need to know that you're predisposed so that you can put protective factors and lifestyle things in place. I didn't think about that when I was making babies. You know, I wasn't like, sir, I'd like to see your genetics. And, you know, I didn't think about that until my own daughter was struggling, and we did some genetic testing for medication. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the gal is like, I'm just going to go through this with you in as layman terms as possible. And I was like, I appreciate that. And she said, well, you know, so if you look at this, she's got depression from both mom's side and dad's side. And I was like, ooh. You know? Like,
well, it's not my fault.
We did not set this child up for success, did we? So I'm thinking through all these things that I didn't know to think about. You know, and also at the time, because I had been working in mental health for so long, I've been doing like all these parenting workshops and all these things. And now I have my own child who's thinking of taking her own life. And I was like, I'm uncomfortable and I feel shame and I feel sad and scared. And on top of all of that, I was feeling really isolated because I felt like I don't want anybody to know. I don't want anybody to know. And at that time, I was really close friends with the previous executive director of Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention. And she was raising a family member who also struggled. And she, I mean, if you had ever met her, she was just very blunt in the way she communicated. And so we were having lunch one day, and the family member that she was supporting was much older than my daughter. And he had gotten into a car accident the night before. And she said, oh, man, Cass, I didn't even want to go into his room this morning because I was like, dear Lord, is he going to be alive when I open this door? And I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe other people have this fear. Mm-hmm. You know, because
I thought that was only my internal.
I thought that I was the only person going through something like that. And I felt this intense relief in hearing another parent have those fears. Mm-hmm. And I realized like, oh my gosh, this is like my childhood all over again. Nobody's talking about this and they need to. And so I just got really focused on, let's help people talk about this out loud. Mm-hmm. And it really became a request of my daughter's because she didn't understand why the kids at school were so mean, you know, because she in middle school really just cut a lot, and it was like shocking to the eye. And so it was really clear to the outside world, like this kid's going through something. Mm-hmm. And she was not met with compassion and curiosity. She was met with judgment and bullying and being isolated from her peers. And she came home one day and she just said, why are people so mean? You know, because the kids had been chanting like crazy girl or something like that. And you know, I didn't want her to hate the world. So I was just like, you know, when people don't know about something, they feel scared. And people respond to fear in lots of different ways. Some people get mean. Some people just hide away from it. Mm-hmm. But most people are not nice. Mm-hmm. And then she just said, Mom, let's help people to know. And so it was her who first wanted to share our story publicly.
I'm so proud of her.
Oh my
I've
gosh.
never met her, but I am proud of her.
Yeah, so we did a film that we use now for our parent workshop, where we're both like telling our experience of going through the things that we're experiencing together and separately through her mental health journey. And it was just interesting because my friend Mari did the documentary, and she questioned us separately. Our answers were so similar.
Oh, wow.
And then to promo the workshop that we built around this film, we did little cuts of it, and they were going to go out on social media. And I can't tell you how naked I felt. Mm-hmm. You know, and we had to have a family meeting because she has siblings and my husband, and we're We're about to put our story out in the world. How do we feel about this?
Yeah.
But my daughter who struggles just said, I really need this. So our whole family was like, okay.
I'll tell you, I'm gonna get teared up now because that's exactly what I thought as you were telling this story, that was her protective factor, right? To tell her story.
Yep.
And I remember a conversation that I had. Now, Maya was fairly healthy. I thought I had 10 plus years. Reggie had just died, and we were about to start Mentally Strong. And I was having a conversation with my sister, and I said, something bad was happening, some business decision, and why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And I knew I needed something, because if Maya died, I would want to hurt myself. And I remember that, so when you think about, the choices that we make and providence, and sometimes protective factors look different than what's on the list of protective factors.
Well, and sometimes protective factors are just having something to build and add value. When I am obliterated, I need something to do with my hands.
Yeah.
I need something to do with my heart. And I think that is, if you have that thing, not only is it helpful for you, but what's beautiful about those things is that they will go on to help so many others. When I look at Kohana, my daughter, her struggle is everlasting. This is a health struggle that she will live and manage across her lifetime. And, I'm constantly asking her to share now, because I know that that's something that she feels passionate about, and she'll forget. But then, reminding her, you're not the only one that is sitting in this spot today. And, or remember last week when it was really bad, somebody is in that place today. And what would you tell them? What helped you? And I think having that thing is just life-saving.
Yeah. And to show that it can be a life. I mean, I'll be in pain from losing my kids forever. And there's days that it hurts really bad. But I will never complete suicide. But that pain just feels unbearable. And regardless, sometimes people will say to me, yeah, but my pain is not as bad as yours. We need to stop comparing pain. Because if it hurts so much that you are thinking about suicide, then that's your pain. That's your threshold. And and just please don't complete.
I think the other thing that it does, though, is living validates the pain. It makes it not for nothing. When I think of your story and all of the knowledge that you've gained, I just did a grief group last night, and I referred to some of the things that I learned from you. And I think you should know that last night at my center, I had a room of, 15 people, because more people came than I thought were going to come. And you positively impacted every life in that room, and I believe served as a protective factor for them. And that is a gift from your children, from your loss, and that honors them in a way that cannot be done in any other, more valid way. And that is just extremely special.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I've been on a spiritual journey too. I think in grief it's important to really connect spiritually, however that is for you. But it has changed for me. I was more of a religious person, and I've grown in different ways. But I have a eternal connection with Maya, and even as you were saying that, she's like, I told you I wanted to help people. And one of the things is her body was getting, like, she needed to be taken care of. She was special because of the seizures and what the thing was doing to her brain. But her soul wanted to help people. And her story is going to help a lot of people.
She is helping people.
Yeah.
That is happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about adults.
Okay.
I don't know, have you ever been to a point in your life where you personally considered suicide?
I have not, and that is only because I have spent so much time thinking about all of the things to try. You know, I had someone that I love very much attempt suicide when I was very young, and that was the first time that I even found out about the concept of suicide, that someone could be in so much pain that they would consider taking their own life. That, which to me was just like, that has to be such a high level of pain. And then, you know, with my own daughter, just knowing like, I want her to live. So I've been so focused on that. And I think it's just, you know, I think we're all put on this earth for a reason. And part of what's ingrained in me is this constant search for how do we help? How do we address that pain? And what have we not tried yet? And so for me, that's been my focus. And so when I get really sad and down, because of course I do, I do really sad work. You know, I sit with folks who just lost someone and hear their stories, and I sit with someone who is thinking like, today might be my last day, you know, and that's hard. And so what I'm always thinking about for myself is, what haven't I tried today? What do I need today? What will help me today? And I really think of it as like, what will help on this day?
Yeah.
Because that's different than what helped yesterday. It could be
how to
different
fill
than what
our
helps
own
tomorrow.
cup. Like, as a mother, I don't, you know, when I was a teenager, young adult, it was all about me and, you know, what made me happy, right? And then you get married, you have kids, and it's all about them. And I realized after losing my children and being 50 and going, well, what do I actually like to do? What fills my cup? Because I had been in fight or flight that whole time. And I think that's part of adult suicide prevention. Like, what fills your cup? What makes you happy, content?
That's exactly right. And that is why, you know, we do that quality of life inventory, because, you know, oftentimes people only focus on what makes them unhappy, what they don't have. And when you do that quality of life inventory, I think what I am really loving about it is that it really highlights you do have a couple of really strong protective factors here. And I think we can really lean into those to build some other ones, you know, and really help them figure out, like, what would fill your cup? What does bring you joy? What do you need support? What have you always wanted to try, but you just haven't?
Yeah.
You know, and helping them overcome those barriers, I feel a lot of passion around that, because I just think, you know, if you're my age or older, you were not raised in a time of, let's focus on self-care, let's talk about our emotions and what's happening on the inside. Like, so there's a huge skill deficit there, and almost shame and a feeling of selfishness in thinking about those things.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like understanding that there are generations of us that need retraining on this topic.
I love that. And I spent the year up to my 50th birthday just like trying new things. I went back to gymnastics as an adult, you know, and I think even with health stuff, it's like people say, oh, you should be a runner or you should lift weights. I don't like doing either one of those things, right? So it doesn't fill my cup. But there is movement that I like that fills my cup, that maybe it's not as strenuously exercising. I might not have this great fit body, but I'm like, okay, I can do that. And I actually enjoy it. The other thing and you talked about this, is it's so easy, especially in intense grief or trauma, to focus on what you don't have. And I adopted 5 children. I had 2 biological, my husband. I've lost both of my biological children. And, you know, the negative side of me, and when I'm in a bad place, it's like I have nothing. I've lost my biological children. And one of the protective factors that happened for me in my journey out of those thoughts is God knew that I needed people, I needed connection, because I'm a smart woman, right? If they would have diagnosed my children when they were born, and I knew they were going to be special and have medical issues, I'm a smart woman. I wouldn't have adopted children, right? Like, I mean, I just wouldn't have. It wouldn't have been smart. You have to. So I adopted 5 children, and then almost immediately is when my son started getting sick. But just think, now I would have nothing. And I have 6 grandkids. Like, so, you know, just being able to reframe that instead of saying, oh, I have no biological children left. Thank God I adopted children.
Yeah.
Because now I have grandchildren to take care of.
That's what I always think, though. I think, you know, always take your next step, because you do not know what's on that part of the path.
Yeah.
You haven't been there yet. And it could be something really great. And I just think, you know, I do understand that it's hard to maintain that hope when you just haven't been feeling well for a long time. And that's why you need help. And you need people around you that can, on your hard day, just sit with you and be your reminder.
Right.
You know, be the thing that tethers you, because we will all have hard days. There will not be one person on this planet that doesn't have a hard day. But it's looking around on that hard day, what do you see?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about both the adult person who is considering suicide and then for their support. Because I think a lot of times that support person is so scared of saying the wrong thing, they're saying nothing.
I first just want to have a soapbox moment of saying that I think every adult who has not should have some level of basic suicide prevention training. They should seek it.
Okay.
Just because we haven't been taught it, and information is just power. And if you don't have a rational conversation about suicide before you're faced with it, it's really hard to access rational thoughts.
So let's just stop for a moment. And where locally and nationally can someone get that first level of suicide prevention?
There are a ton of, so nationally you can go to like QPR Institute, and they have online modules you can take. There are videos on YouTube that you could watch. You know, here in town, we maintain a community training calendar on SP, so S as in Sam, P as in pumpkin, collab.org. There's a community calendar that shows all of the free suicide prevention trainings that are happening around town. And that's probably happening in most towns at this point, because we've learned how important this information is. But then I think that, you know, I was thinking or hearing someone else talk about this the other day, and it really struck me, because when we're afraid to say the wrong thing, so we say nothing. Like, I think what they said is nothing is the opposite of like positive affirmation. So when you think of, the example they used was if you walk into the break room and your coworker is sitting there looking at their phone in tears, and you accidentally walk in and you make eye contact, and then you like back out because you're like, oh, I'm sorry, like you need some privacy. And then a week goes by and you still haven't said anything to that coworker. And, you know, they asked, what's that coworker thinking? And everybody in the room raised their hand, and they said things like, you don't care about me, or you think I'm weird, or, you know, all these negative things. And so all of those negative thoughts came from saying nothing.
Right.
Versus if you said the wrong thing, even, you know, if you said, oh, I'm sorry, you probably didn't want me to interrupt you. And they might say, no, actually, I would love someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Or they might say, like, yeah, give me a few minutes. But words help.
Yeah.
And so even if you go to your loved one or the person you're worried about and say, I don't know the exact right words, but I see you and I'm worried about you.
Yeah.
You know, that just...
Yeah, I think
right there.
being able to feel confident enough to say you don't know. It's okay to not know.
Absolutely. And most don't.
Yeah.
Even if you've taken a training, the first time that you talk to someone, you're still really nervous. And I think own all of that. I'm really nervous to talk about this with you right now because I've never talked about this before. And the only reason why I'm doing it is because I care about you.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you get vulnerable
but you're not gonna
first,
fix it. It's
right.
also important for the support person to know you're not going to fix it. But that doesn't mean it's about providing space, connection, something for them. It's not about fixing it.
You know, anytime that you're talking with someone about their mental health or what's going on with them, start with just giving them space to tell their story. And really engage in active listening, which means you're not talking. You're not telling your story. You're really just, and even when that thing comes up in you where you want to argue with what they're saying or you want to say, that's not true, you know, just listening and thinking through, what are they telling me? And what is this story? How are they experiencing this story? What is this story doing to them? And usually it comes down to three things. They are feeling like they don't belong. They are feeling like they are a burden to the people around them. And they are getting more and more comfortable with the idea that death is the only way out. And when you think about those things, what a sad, lonely, terrible place to be. And this is someone who needs care. And compassion.
My listeners often hear my story of you know, the decisions that I make and the struggle and to bring myself out of it. But what would you say to you, because you know my story might not connect with everyone, an adult who is you know considering suicide and maybe hasn't gotten help or has and nothing's helped.
Here's what I hear all the time. You know, I spend a lot of times at memorials and funerals. And what I hear resoundingly at all of those funerals and memorial services or celebrations of life, whatever they want to call them, is this just strong feeling of, I wish I would have been given the opportunity to show up for this person. I wish I had known. You know, and I think we're so afraid to talk out loud or to ask for what we need. And what that comes down to is, I'm afraid that you don't really love me. I'm afraid to ask you in a very concrete, tangible way to show up for me. And every loved one that I've sat with feels so cheated by that. I wish I had just been given the opportunity to show my love to this person, you know. And so I think if you are someone who is really struggling and you feel like you've exhausted everything you know, then think of the person who comes to your mind very first and ask them for help. Ask them to show you something that you can't see right now, and they will.
And be gracious of how they might mess up showing up, because I think...
Any human system is not perfect, right? So realize that even if their first response is like, you can't be serious. You know, that's coming from a place of shock and fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shock and fear is driven by their love for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and we hear it all the time, but it is very real. I think most of us would rather be doing anything than experiencing the death of someone that we love. There is really very little that we would not do to try and help.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew, that was powerful. Thank you. So tell us about Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention, your fundraising efforts, how people can support you. So
we are located downtown Colorado Springs in a little building very close to Colorado College, and there folks can access free individual therapy, grief, suicide loss bereavement therapy, which is very specific. We have support groups that happen every week. And then we have peer support volunteers who, our goal is really to increase the amount of supportive connections that folks have. And then we provide free education and awareness to the community. So we want people to have the information that they need to keep themselves and each other safe. And we do that all at no cost to the participant as often as possible, trying to remove as many barriers as possible for folks who are needing to access help. And we do that through begging for money in every fancy way possible. We have two big fundraisers every year. Our first one is coming up on May 4th. We're having our annual Surviving the Storm Charity Gala. It happens at the Antlers Hotel downtown on Saturday, May 4th. And it's a really beautiful event. It's really the lighter side of suicide prevention. It highlights stories of individuals who are struggling and how they have pushed through in these storms and how they are choosing to stay. Because staying is really a choice. It's an intentional choice and it takes work. And then we honor the community members who are helping people to stay, who are providing those supportive services or are just being supportive, just being a peer support volunteer. Maybe it's not a professional service, but they are just showing up for the folks in our community who are struggling. And it's really a night of just talking about the fact that suicide prevention doesn't have to be scary.
Yeah.
Did
you want to actually have a table at the grief in case you can, grab some more people's interests?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because there'll be some hanging out and eating after.
Yeah.
Love to have you to have a table
I think
there.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And then we have our Race Against Suicide that happens in September, which is Suicide Awareness Month. And then you can visit our website to just see all the services that we have, or if there's a way you want to get involved. We live and die off volunteers, so we need volunteers all the time.
And is there education for those support people, whether that be for adults or parents?
Yes, we provide all different kinds of classes. The workshop that I would say is best for parents and caregivers. We have a workshop that's called Perfectly Imperfect Support Rooted in Love. And it's for the caregiver who is supporting someone who's struggling. Because whether we realize it or not, those take learned skills. They're not built into us. And most often, especially in crisis de-escalation, everything that is a natural human response is not helpful. So learning some strategies to work through these is really important. And it's really nice to connect with other people who have sat where you're sitting or who have similar experiences. It's nice to hear you've made the same mistakes. Yep, I did that too.
Yeah.
I made that same mistake. Or hear something like, oh my gosh, I'm going to try that. I can't believe I never thought of it, and it's just nice to share space with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Hug.